Have you ever wondered how a small Southeast Asian nation became the center of the world's attention in the mid-20th century? Well, let's take a trip back in time. The Vietnam War didn't just appear out of thin air. No, it was the result of a complex sequence of historical events. Imagine, if you will, a region known as French Indochina, a collection of Southeast Asian territories under French colonial rule in the early 20th century. The seeds of discontent were sown here as locals chafed under foreign control. Enter stage left Ho Chi Minh, a man who would become a pivotal figure in Vietnam's fight for independence. His rise to power was fueled by a potent blend of nationalism and communism, ideologies that were gaining traction worldwide. Meanwhile, the Cold War was simmering in the background, with the United States and the Soviet Union locked in a tense standoff. This global chess match would cast a long shadow over Vietnam, and so the stage was set for a conflict that would shake the world. The fuse was lit and the Vietnam War erupted like a firestorm. Picture this. The year is 1964, and a small incident in the Gulf of Tonkin involving a couple of US destroyers and North Vietnamese naval vessels lights the fuse to a conflict that would rage on for more than a decade. This minor skirmish quickly escalates, leading to the full-scale deployment of US forces in Vietnam. Now let's talk about the strategies used by both sides. The US military, with its superior firepower, opted for a search and destroy approach. They aimed to engage the enemy in large-scale battles to inflict heavy casualties. On the other side, the Viet Cong, the South Vietnamese communist rebels, and their North Vietnamese allies used guerrilla tactics. They relied on ambushes, booby traps, and a complex network of tunnels to fight a war of attrition against the Americans. Fast forward to the end of January in 1968. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, a series of surprise attacks on more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. Despite being a military failure for the North Vietnamese, the Tet Offensive was a turning point in the war. It exposed the credibility gap in US government reports about the progress of the war and shocked the American public, who had been led to believe that victory was near. Major battles, such as the Siege of Khe Sanh and the Battle of Hue, further intensified the conflict. The images and news reports from these battles were beamed into living rooms across America, highlighting the grim reality of the war and the human cost of the conflict. In the midst of the chaos, public opinion back home was starting to boil over. The American public, initially supportive of the war effort, began to question the US involvement in Vietnam. The anti-war movement gained momentum, with protests erupting across the country. The Vietnam War, once seen as a righteous crusade against communism, was now increasingly viewed as a quagmire with no end in sight. While bombs were dropping in Vietnam, a different kind of explosion was happening on American soil. This explosion was not of weaponry, but of public sentiment. The anti-war movement was gaining momentum, with citizens from all walks of life joining hands in protest against the conflict that was taking lives and draining resources. The media too played a pivotal role in swaying public opinion. For the first time, the horrors of war were beamed into American living rooms, making it impossible for people to ignore the grim reality of Vietnam. The impact on American society was profound, leading to a profound shift in attitudes towards government and authority. Meanwhile, across the globe in Paris, negotiations were underway to bring an end to the conflict. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in early 1973, marked the beginning of the end. US troops began to withdraw, leaving behind a war-torn Vietnam and a deeply divided American populace. The end of the war, however, was not the end of the story. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 marked the final collapse of the South Vietnamese government. The images of desperate people scrambling to board helicopters to flee the advancing North Vietnamese forces are etched into our collective memory. In 1975, the guns fell silent, but the echoes of the Vietnam War still resonate today. The lessons learned and the scars left behind are reminders of a turbulent period in our history. The Vietnam War, a quagmire of political, military, and social complexities, left a legacy that is still felt today. It was a whirlwind of emotions, marked by a staggering human cost and a profound impact on Vietnam. As we reflect, we recognize the lessons learned, the resilience of the human spirit, and the indomitable will to endure. It's a stark reminder of the effects of war, a testament to the trials of a nation. The Vietnam War, a chapter in history that continues to provoke thought and stir emotions decades after the last bullet was fired.